This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Welcome everyone, Bruchim Habayim, to a special edition of All Parsha on the Ramban on Parshas Terumah. We're going to be studying a number of the very fundamental teachings of the Ramban on this week's Parsha. And let us begin with the opening comments of the Ramban on the Parsha. The Ramban is explaining the reason why the Parsha of the building of the Mishkan comes in the immediate aftermath of Parshas Yisro and Mishpatim, the giving of the Torah, the Aser Sadibrois, and the main statutes of the Torah. The Ramban says, Kasher Dibar Hashem im Yisrael panim b'panim Aser Sadibrois. Once God spoke and communicated with Klal Yisrael through the Ten Commandments, the Tziva Oisam Aidei Moshe K'tzas Mitzvos, and He commanded them through Moshe some mitzvos, certainly important mitzvos, but not all the mitzvos. Shehim K'may Avois L'Mitzvos Shel Torah. These mitzvos that were commanded in the Aser Sadibros and Mishpatim can be deemed the fatherheads, so to speak, the fathers of the mitzvos, the main principles of the Torah. Kasher Hinhigu Rabbi Seinu Mager Shabam Lehis Yahid. Just like when somebody comes to Bezdin, when a Gentile comes to Bezdin to convert, so the Bezdin will tell the Gentile about the main principles of the Torah. Likewise, when God, so to speak, took us as His people, He didn't communicate at that time in depth all the mitzvahs of the Torah, but only the primary ones, Ramban says. And the Jewish people, in fact, accepted to adhere and to observe everything that Moshe would command them from Hashem. God sealed the covenant with them on this. Behold, they are now to Him as a nation, and He is to them, God is to them, Hashem is to them as our God. Kasher Hisnima Mitchila, as Hashem stipulated originally. Hashem said, V'yatam Shamayat Tishmu B'Koili, and now, if you will listen to my voice, and you keep my covenant, then v'yisem li segula mikol ha'amim, you will be a treasured people from all the nations, kili kol ha'aretz. V'amar, and God said, v'yatem tili mamlechas kohanim v'gad kadosh, you will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So Hashem said, you accept these principles, you commit to observe all the mitzvahs of the Torah, then I seal a covenant with you, you will be my people, I will be your God. V'yinehem kadoshim. Now, behold, they are holy. Ru'uyim sheyiyah bahem mikdash. If they're holy, they are worthy to have a sanctuary, lahashur shchinas b'neihem, for God to reside His shchina among them. So the shchina is the natural consequence of the receiving of the Torah and the Jewish people's commitment to observe the Torah. Ulekach tziva tchila al davar hamishkan, and therefore, God commanded at first regarding the matter of the Mishkan, that there would be a house among them to be designated, to be sanctified for His name. So the Rebbeinu Shalom commanded Moshe Rabbeinu first regarding the inyan of the Mishkan, meaning before any other commandments. Before the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe about other mitzvahs in the Torah, and he's telling them about the command to build a Mishkan, and that it will be designated for him. V'sham yidaber Moshe. There he'll speak to Moshe, v'yitzaves b'nei Yisrael, and he'll command the b'nei Yisrael. So therefore, the building of the Mishkan is a natural consequence after the receiving of the Aser Sadibros and some of the main principles of the Torah. Now the Ramban defines for us the objective of the Mishkan, and pay careful attention because not everybody agrees that this in fact is the objective of the Mishkan. Says Ramban, V'nei ikar ha'chefetz ba'Mishkan, the main desire and objective of the Mishkan, hu makom menuchas hashchina, is the place of the resting place of the Shechina, shehu ha'arayin, which is the Arayin. So the Ramban says, as a corollary of what he just said, that now that Bnei Yisrael is on the proper madrega after receiving the Torah, and they are worthy for Hashem to live among them, so the Ramban seems to be articulating that the purpose of the Mishkan is a resting place of the Shechina. Then, therefore, the main part of the Mishkan is the Arayin. Shehu ha'arayin, k'may sha'amar, as the pasuk says, "V'noi adati l'cha sham," I will meet you there. V'dibarti itcha mehalak haparsa, I'll speak to you from upon the covering of the aroin, the kapares, mibein shnei akruvim, from between the two cherubs, asher al aroin ho'edos, that's on the aron of the covenant, is kol asher atzaveka, is kol asher atzava ischa b'nei Yisrael, whatever I'm going to command the b'nei Yisrael. So if the function of the Mishkan is Hashras, Hashchina, God residing His presence, then it is understandable why the first item and first kli, the first appurtenance commanded about was the Aron, because that fulfilled that objective, namely the Hashras Hashchina. Al Kain Hikdim Ha'aron Ba'akapiras. Therefore, the first kli being taught in Parshas Terumah is the Aron and the Kapiras. Bekan Kihu Muktam B'Maila, because it takes precedence in terms of importance. And then after the Aron, V'Samach L'Aron Hashulchan. After the Aron is the Shulchan, and the Ramban, in his discussion on the Shulchan, and we'll say this outside, describes the concept that from time immemorial, for God to bestow blessing on man, there has to be something for it to be chal upon. There has to be some element of tangible sustenance that is already extant, and for the Rebbe Shalom to come and extend that bracha. And that is the concept of the Shulchan. The Shulchan was a table that had the bread on it already, and through that agent, the Rebbe Shalom provided sustenance for the Jewish people. So again, the Shulchan is furthering the concept that the Rebbe Shalom is with the Jewish people. And then the menorah, as the Gemara says in Shabbos, the purpose of the menorah is also to give witness, to testify that the Rebbe Shalom is with us. Shem Kalim Kamayo, they are also Kalim, just like the Aron and the Shulchan. V'yoyru al inyan hamishkan she'ba'avuray nasa, and it demonstrates the objective of the Mishkan and what it was made for. That's why the Ramban says in the next few lines that when Moshe commanded to build the Mishkan, and he went, in fact, Bezalel did build the Mishkan, Moshe spoke to Bezalel and he said, build the walls and build the building itself. Es ha-Mishkan, es ha-halayv, yes mechseu. In other words, in terms of the order of importance and accomplishing of the objective, certainly the Aron is first, and then the Shulchan, and then the Menorah, because since the purpose of the Mishkan is Hashras Hashchina, that is accomplished through the Aron, the Shulchan, and the Menorah. But in terms of the actual building, Moshe told Bezalel the order of building it, how you would typically build a building, and that's in fact how Bezalel built it. That's because in terms of practically constructing it, it's practically constructed the building first, and then the kelim. However, in terms of the machshav and the philosophy behind the Mishkan, in order of importance, in Parshas Terumah, it first lists the Aron, the Shulchan, and the Menorah. Now the Ramban goes on to say what was achieved through the agent of the Mishkan and in the Mishkan on a deeper level. And let's first remind ourselves what the Ramban taught in his closing remarks of Bereshis, which are also the opening remarks of Sefer Shemais, namely that Sefer Shemais is the book of Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. And the Ramban says that we are not considered redeemed until we reach the madrega of the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that the Shechina rested on their tent. And that is why Sefer Shemais doesn't just talk about the redemption from Egypt, but we were not fully considered redeemed, the Ramban says, until we reached the madrega of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who housed Hashem's presence on their tent. The Ramban called it Soid Eloika Ale Oyhel. So this is what we're learning now, that the Mishkan brought us back. It was a reclamation project to bring us back to the madrega of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And now the Ramban says quite a profound idea. It says Ramban, V'soid ha-Mishkan hu, the secret, the essence of the Mishkan. Sheyiyah ha-kavod asher shachan al Har Sinai, so that the divine presence that resided on Har Sinai, shoichein olav benistar, now resides with the Jewish people in a concealed manner. In other words, Ramban learns that Har Sinai was captured in the Mishkan. The Mishkan captured the divine presence that rested on Har Sinai. Like it says by Har Sinai, Vayishkoin Kvod Hashem al Har Sinai, God's honor resides on Har Sinai, Uchsiv, and it says in the description of Maimin Har Sinai Parshas va'eschanan. Hein heranu Hashem leikenu. You showed us Hashem as kavoida v'es gadla, your honor and your greatness. So it says likewise by the Mishkan, Ken Kosaba Mishkan, uchvoid Hashem maleas HaMishkan, the honor of God filled the Mishkan. Now, the Ramban points out, it says twice, the honor of God filled the Mishkan, corresponding to kevoidoi and godlai, God's honor and His greatness, which is a mystical concept. Now, v'haya ba'mishkan tamid im Yisrael hakavoid shenir lemar Sinai. It now resided with the Jewish people always the honor that appeared to them on Har Sinai. Uvivoi Moshe, and when Moshe would come to the Mishkan, Haya Elav Adibar Nidbar Loi B'Har Sinai. God communicated with him in the same way He communicated with him on Har Sinai, like it says in Devarim Mechvaysham Mishnah Torah, Min Hashemayim Mishmiachas Kol Yasareka V'Al Haaretz Harachas Yishai Agdoila. From heaven you made it heard your great voice to rebuke, and on the earth you showed your great fire. So on Har Sinai, God spoke from the heaven, and His honor was apparent from the fire. That was likewise achieved in the Mishkan. Kach Mishkan Kasav. It says they heard the voice of God speaking from the Kaporos, meaning it emanated from the Shamayim, like on Har Sinai, and came through from the Kaporos. Vayishma Sakom Yidaber Lo Mimei Kaporos, and then Mi Bein Shnei Kruvim Vayidaber Elav, and it came through the two Kruvim that the Ramban is going to say is analogous to the fire, since they are made of gold. That was analogous to the fire of Har Sinai. So the same way on Har Sinai, the voice emanated from the heaven and came out through the fire, so too in the Mishkan, the voice emanated from heaven, came out from the Kaporos, we are Mi Bein Shnei Kruvim, which is analogous to the fire. So this is the idea of the Ramban, that the Hashras Hashchina, the divine presence that rested in the Mishkan, was merely a way to capture to capture what transpired on Har Sinai. This was contained in the Mishkan for the experience of Moshe and all of Klal Yisrael. Now I want to share with you, it's interesting, the Ramban clearly identifies that the function, the objective of the Mishkan, that it should be a place of Hashras Hashchina. So you say, what else? What else could be the objective of the Mishkan? Amazingly, if you look in the Rambam in his Sefer HaMitzvahs, Mitzvah Chaf, the Ramban says, Tzivanu livnois beis avoida. We're commanded to build a house of service, that there should be hakrava, the offering of karbanos, v'havaras ha'isha, and the burning of the fire tamid. And we should go there to be oilei regal. And this is the mitzvah of asuli mikdash. That doesn't seem to be the same identification and definition of the Ramban. The Ramban says the objective of the Mishkan is a place for God to reside, and the Rambam seems to say the objective of the Mishkan is it should be a place of avodah. The Rambam likewise in Hilchos Beis HaBechira, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, he also enunciates this. Mitzvah saseh lasois bayis laShem. It's a mitzvah to make a house prepared for God. Muchan liyos, to be designated, makrivim bayah karbanos, to bring sacrifices. So that's very different than the definition of the Ramban. The Rambam seems to define the makom hamikdash, the makom hamishkan, as a makom avoida, and the Ramban clearly says the function of the Mishkan that it should be a place for Hashras Hashchina. There's another interesting machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban. And this is not found in the Ramban on Chumash, but the Ramban in his Hasagos to the mitzvahs, the Rambam says in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, Mitzvah Chaf, that building the Beis HaBechira is mitzvah bifnei atzma. It's a mitzvah into of itself, and it includes the building of its components, namely the construction of the menorah, the construction of the shulchan, and the mizbeach. They are components of the Asiyas HaMishkan. So the Rambam learns, building the Mishkan and building the appurtenances are all one mitzvah. Not so the Ramban. The Ramban in his Hasagos, Mitzvah Lamed Gimel, quotes the Rambam, and he says that I don't agree with that which the Rambam says, that the building of the appurtenances are components of the building of the Mishkan. Lefi she'ena kelim chelek min habayis. The kelim are not a chelek of the bayis. They're not a chelek of the binyan hamikdash. They're separate mitzvahs, and they're not ma'akev. V'lachein etzli, says the Ramban, in my opinion, asiyas ha'aroin v'hakapoires is a mitzvah by itself, and the building of the menorah is a mitzvah by itself, and the building of the kelim are a mitzvah by itself. So another interesting Ramban and Rambam that they argue. According to the Rambam, the building of the kelim is under the rubric of building the Mishkan. According to the Ramban, they're separate mitzvahs. Rav Asher Weiss in the Minchas Asher, in Sim Memches Ois Beis, he says that these two disputes between the Rambam and the Ramban are dependent one on the other. In other words, the reason why the Rambam holds that building the kelim of the Mishkan fall under the umbrella category of building the Mishkan, and the reason why the Ramban holds that the building of the kelim is a separate mitzvah from building the Mishkan, is because the Rambam and the Ramban argue regarding the objective of the Mishkan. That the Rambam holds the objective of the Mishkan is that you should have a place to worship, a place to do the avodah. Now, you can't just have a big room to do the avodah. You need the vessels, the appurtenances with which to do the avodah. So, building the Aron and building the Mizbeach and building the Menorah are part and parcel, part of the mitzvah of building the Mishkan, because the objective of the Mishkan is having a place to do the Avodah. But according to the Ramban, that is not the essential function of the Mishkan. The essential function of the Mishkan is to have a makom of Hashras HaShechina, to have a place where God is residing. There is another function of the Mishkan, namely that we do the Avodah in the Mishkan. We need the Aron, we need the Menorah, we need the Mizbeach, and therefore the Ramban counts the construction of the kelim as a separate mitzvah from the construction of the Mishkan itself. But according to the Rambam, they're all part of having a makom avodah. So these are some very important ideas, all based on the opening Ramban in this week's Parsha, that the function of the Mishkan was that we should have a place for Hashem Shechina to reside, and this is something we earned and deserved after Hashem gave us the main principles of the Torah, the main mitzvahs of the Torah, and we accepted them, and we sealed a covenant with God. Now we are worthy to have a place to house the Shechina. Wishing everyone a wonderful Shabbos, Haba Aleinu L'Tova, Bracha V'Hatzlacha.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.